My name is Krista Jones, and I have the pleasure of being your MC for the evening. I work here at MaRS in our Education Innovation Initiative. Tonight, I think you're all in for a very special treat. Our speakers are very vocal members of the very controversial and hotly debated topic, the future of higher education. It's being debated globally, frequently, and with increasing urgency. As I was preparing for this evening, I, of course, was rereading the works of all of our speakers. And what was really obvious to me, that both were making very compelling, data-rich arguments for a very different future of higher education. Both are persuasive and intuitive with visions that hold real promise. And as I finished reading both of them, I thought, oh, I could see either reality happening. And so it's going to be kind of interesting to see the blend and what this conversation and all of us bring to the conversation here this evening. The common thing that really kind of comes forth is that something needs to happen and that action of some form must be taken to ensure that the systems that exist and the systems that are yet to be formed continue to meet the demands of both our young up-and-comers and to equip them with the relevant skills that they need, as well as with our existing workers and retraining them for the demands of the new workforce and the pace of global change. We are really excited tonight that we get to host this event with Pearson. This event is part of the MaRS Global Leadership event. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a series of lectures of this sort that we present that is talking about the latest leadership thinking and global trends. And we bring in leaders from around the world. We really hope that at the second part of this event this evening that you will all take part in this discussion. We're really interested in getting all of your views as well as the views of our speakers. Here at MaRS, for those of you who aren't familiar with MaRS, we do provide a platform, an innovation platform unlike any other. We combine world-class advisory services, thought leadership, and collaboration that gives us the opportunity to work deep in many sectors across the board, education being just one of them. The belief that we have here at MaRS is that our future does matter and that the quality of that future depends on innovation in all of the sectors. I'd like to introduce Marilyn Ostofsky. Did I do okay? Who's the Vice President of Marketing for Higher Education at Pearson, to give a few words of welcome.
Well, good evening. My name is Marilyn Ostofsky, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Pearson Canada's Higher Education Division. On behalf of the Pearson team, I wanted to thank MaRS Education for organizing tonight's event and for their continued commitment to education and helping support and develop future innovators. I also want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight. Both our future and our current leaders in education, because I think higher education is a really important thing and a great industry to be in right now. So thank you for all attending. I'm sure most of you would agree it's a particularly exciting time to be in higher education at the moment. Education is undergoing a significant transformation fueled by new learning technologies, a diverse student population, and a global competitive economy. And Pearson, as the world's leading learning partner, we're really focused on helping break through some of the great challenges facing education today around achievement, access, and affordability. And we're deeply committed to improving outcomes for students, faculty, and institutions that we serve. Our vision at Pearson is that the educational experience needs to be transformed, and at the same time, transformed to become more global, yet student-centered and more personalized. We believe that dramatic gains in student achievement and instructional effectiveness will be gained through new learning and product models. And we're already starting to see a lot of this, particularly in Canada and Ontario, with some of the great schools doing really innovative things. And that technology and innovation are going to continue to play a role hand in hand to create the development of new educational models that are going to create more effective alignment of standards, curriculum design, educator effectiveness, and assessment. At Pearson, like all of you I'm sure do, we put the learner at the center of everything that we do. And central to that strategy is our commitment to ensuring the delivery of learning outcomes and performance across all the products and services that we deliver. We're very fortunate to have Sir Michael Barber and his team to help guide us in that work and to make sure that we never lose sight of that important commitment. So in closing, and on behalf of Pearson, again, we're very excited to be partners with MaRS and here tonight. We're very excited by the avalanche that is coming and to be taking part in reinventing 21st century learning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlene. Higher education is indeed an industry that's in the midst of disruption. The pace of global change, the changing needs of students and industry, and the state of technology are factors that are driving forces behind this disruption. Last year, in the US alone, $11.9 billion was spent on education technology. And there's also a tremendous growth that has occurred in the VC spending that I think in 2011 had over $400 million invested, up from about $150 million just 5 short years earlier. What's really interesting about this is that education has become trendy and cool. The startups that are coming out of this space are actually getting tech-like valuations that are shown for growth and scale, as opposed to the old kind of slower, more stable and depressed valuations of education companies of the past. And what's really interesting is that what we're seeing from an innovation perspective is that technology is fueling the change on so many different levels. And we're starting to see really interesting innovations happening, not only in ed tech, but on the pedagogical and content layer, and actually different modes and business models as how to deliver it. And that's what's really exciting. So let's get to the heart of this discussion on the future of higher ed. Our first presenters are a powerful group of 3. And they're the authors of An Avalanche is Coming, Higher Ed, and the Revolution Ahead. The first speaker, or the first member of the team, is Sir Michael Barber. He's a leading authority on education systems and education reform. Over the past 2 decades, his research and advisory work has focused on school improvement, standards, performance, system-wide reform, effective implementation, access, success, and funding in higher education, and Michael has advised governments on every continent on reforming public services. Michael recently joined Pearson as Chief Education Advisor, leading Pearson's worldwide program of research into education, policy, and efficacy, advising on and supporting the development of products and services that build on their research findings. Michael is an author and a distinguished visiting fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Exeter. The next member of this team is Katelyn Donnelly. She will be here in person tonight, and she's an executive director at Pearson, where she leads the Affordable Learning Fund, a venture fund that invests in early-stage companies that serve low-cost and services to schools and learners in the developing world. Katelyn is also an active advisor for Pearson's global strategy, research, and innovation agenda as a consultant to governments on the transformation and delivery of education systems. Katelyn is a co-author of recent publications on education systems, Oceans of Innovation, and An Avalanche is Coming. She serves as a non-executive director and strategic advisor for several startup companies across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Previously, Katelyn was a consultant at McKinsey & Company. And the final member of the 3 is Saad Rizvi. Saad is Pearson's Executive Director of Efficacy, where he leads a global effort to improve educational outcomes from the company's suites of products, services, investments, and acquisitions. Previously, Saad was a consultant at McKinsey & Company, where he led innovation and transformation work for several Fortune 100 companies and advised education systems, system reform, and delivery across Asia, Europe, Africa, and North America. Saad is the co-author of Oceans of Innovation and An Avalanche is Coming, and he has been a keynote speaker at major education conferences. He graduated from distinction from Yale University and currently serves as a non-executive director for several companies in the fields of education and technology. Now, boy, just reading that totally makes me feel unworthy. But without any further ado, Katelyn and Sir Michael and Saad will be on the video conference up above.
All right. Well, thank you, Krista, for that fantastic introduction. And on behalf of my colleagues, we're very excited to be here today, and we're excited to talk about a topic that's near and dear to our heart. The topic that we're covering today are the changes and trends that we see in higher education and what we think some of the implications are for governments, entrepreneurs, and institutions around the globe. We've laid out our argument thoroughly in Avalanche is Coming, this publication that you've seen. And so if you want to get more information or go deeper into the argument, you can find the publication. It's on iTunes or iBooks or free on the internet. When we started this collaboration about 6 months ago, most of us coming from, we were coming from a K-12 background, but we increasingly were very interested in seeing the changes that were happening in higher ed and how quickly the ecosystem was developing. And when we were thinking about the changes that we saw, we referenced back, or we kept on coming back to a quote from Norman Davies, the esteemed historian. He's described historical change like an avalanche. It starts like a snow-covered mountainside that looks calm, but the change is under the surface. Similarly, the traditional university university building with Doric columns looks serene. The last 30 years has shown a tremendous building boom for universities, an incredible expansion of research, and also an increase in access. When Michael was an undergraduate, only 14% of secondary school graduates went to university. That number is now 50%. There's a whole series of pressures on higher education today, and small things are changing over time. These are rather invisible changes, but unmistakable. And just like an avalanche, you know things are going to change, but you just don't know when. So in that context, we thought we'd start by evaluating what are some of the trends that are really impacting our universities and system today and students trying to enter the workforce. And the first was that the global economy has fundamentally changed. Whether it's 3D printing or driverless cars, the rise of a rental economy with new startups like Airbnb and Zipcar, wearable computing with innovations like Google Glass, or mobile everything, we clearly live in a new era. We are more connected, more agile, more dynamic. We've seen tremendous shifts in the global economy with the rise of emerging markets, particularly from Pacific Asia. The US is no longer the lone superpower. We live in a G0 world where responsibility and leadership are diffuse, and there's no one clear leader. As the global economy becomes more connected and fluid, the nature of work is also changing. Administrative tasks can be more easily automated and outsourced. The divide between skilled and unskilled jobs is growing. To compete and support a livelihood in the new economy will require top-notch skills. Skills that weren't necessary before for a lifelong profession. It's not enough to have a lifelong or a life profession such as accounting or marketing. Instead, there will have to be a series of skills and knowledge that will be required. You'll have to be well-educated, imaginative, collaborative, confident, and willing to go the extra mile. In the words of a recent publication, The Startup of You by Reid Hoffman and Ben Casnocha, you'd have to remain in permanent beta. Young people will have to create their jobs, they'll have to think like entrepreneurs, and they'll always have to look for a way of creating value. Our education system today doesn't currently reflect this mentality. So at the same time that the global economy is changing, it's also suffering. The Eurozone growth is near zero. China, the growth was at 9%, but now it's at 7.5% and falling quickly. Across the world, particularly in the US, we are seeing dramatic increases in income inequality and an erosion of the traditional middle class. Between 1979 and 2007, the top 1% in the US grew their income by an incredible 275% compared to just 40% for the middle classes. Coupled with this, governments are under pressure from large debts, aging populations, lacking a tax base. Unlike previous generations where education was often funded, increasingly young people are going to have to fund their education themselves. People in government know that the investment in higher education is important, but it's becoming difficult to finance. Young people are suffering as a result. Across Europe, there are incredibly high rates of unemployment. Spain is at 50%. Portugal is at 36%, 22% in the UK. And at the same time that there's high unemployment, strangely, employers have unfilled vacancies. They can't find people with the right skills. A recent McKinsey survey found that 45% of employers struggle to find people with the right skills for entry-level positions, and 70% of employers blame this on lack of adequate training. So clearly, there are issues with the way our education system is preparing young people for the global economy, even in a time when jobs seem to be scarce. So what are some of the problems? Well, what we found is the cost of getting a degree has grown tremendously. In the last 25 years, the cost of higher education in the United States has grown an incredible 440%. So that's 4 times faster than normal inflation and twice the rate of medical inflation. So there are many cost drivers. One is the race to become all world-class, all-inclusive universities like Harvard. This phenomenon has been documented well by Clay Christensen in the publication or his book, The Innovative University. Unfortunately, as we point out, very few schools have the financial resources like Harvard, and they don't have the endowment bases, and they don't have the access to the same world-class professors. The second pressure on costs that we found was university rankings. Almost all the university rankings are based on inputs, not on outputs. That means the more you spend, the higher ranked you are. This is driving costs up as universities compete vigorously to be seen higher in rankings. Either way, the implication is creating an increasing burden on young people. Student debt in the US has just passed $1 trillion outstanding, and there is more outstanding debt. There's more outstanding student debt than credit card or auto loan debt. And this has become a recent large issue for US Congress. And so while costs are increasing, you would expect that at least students are getting good value for money. But we found that that's actually the opposite. The value of the degree is falling. It's still valuable to get a degree in general, but it varies by what university you go to and what field of study you choose to perform. And either way, your degree is not enough. In the US, we found that the average earning for a US student with an undergrad degree fell 15% between 2000 and 2012, despite a 72% increase in cost. Part of this pressure is the global economy. We're more interconnected and competition has never been greater. But still, it doesn't account. Another element is grade inflation. Studies in the UK have shown that a large number and increase of firsts or of high numbers of grades. One concept we'd studied when writing this paper was the student-professor non-aggression pact. Students have for years been happy to trade high grades with less learning so that they can spend greater free time with friends, while professors are often happy to give out high marks for less effort so they can focus on their research. Now, obviously, this is not universally true, but there's certainly an element of it. Students aren't getting the learning that they need from university to prepare them adequately for the global economy. And what we found is that even though overall, we know the degree isn't good enough for employment. Employers don't rely on degrees to make hiring decisions, although they're enough to make it into the resume pile. And only 18% of people think that a university education is good preparation for today's labor market. And employers say definitively that a degree is no more than a filter. Furthermore, content is now ubiquitous. The traditional value of the university was their stronghold or their monopoly on the content, curriculum, and learning provided. But with the rise of the internet and increasing technology, we live in an era of openness and increased access. The power of the academy is reduced as content and information has become more freely available. You no longer have to go to a college library to look up facts, ideas, and analysis. You can do that anywhere. Not only can you do that from your computer, you can also do it from the phone in your pocket while you're riding a bus. While access has increased, so has the sheer quantity of information. In 1726, there were only 344 academic articles published per year. In 2009, that number was around 1.5 million. While information is far from wisdom, the key here is information is everywhere. Universities aren't the only place content is created. Increasingly, synthesis pieces are being produced by think tanks, consultancies, and these are often more tailored to real-world audiences and geared towards impact. Similarly, new mediums such as blogging platforms and Twitter can provide quick, interactive, and open dialogue. So what does this mean for a university, and what are the implications for the institutions and governments and students, and how should they react? Saad will take you through.
Great. First of all, thank you for inviting us to speak. I wish I could be there in person, but one of the challenges of a Pakistani passport is that it's really impossible to get anywhere. So I'll do my best from here. So I'm going to talk about what are the elements of a typical university as we know it right now, and what's happening to it in the future in light of all these changes that Katelyn just described. So what you see right now is what we typically think of when we think of an image of a typical university. You think of the beautiful building, the Doric columns, and there's this feeling that nothing can take this away and it's going to be here forever. So that's what you think of when the word university comes to your mind. Now let's think of what are the elements of a typical university, and then we'll talk about what's happening to it now. So first of all, a university has students. You need students to have the university, and typically students are 18 to 22-year-olds who are enrolled in a 4-year degree. So that's the first element of a university. Then every university has the faculty and the governance. The faculty are obviously the professors, the PhD students, the research assistants, and the governance includes the university administration, the staff, the fundraising body, and all the other people involved in making sure the machinery of the university keeps running smoothly. Then if we think of the program of a university, it typically consists of 4 elements, which are the 4 columns of this diagram. There's firstly the curriculum, and the curriculum is basically what do you learn. It's the courses, it's the textbooks, it's the syllabus of what you learn in a lecture. So that's the first element. The second element is the teaching and learning. And the best way to describe it is how do you learn something that you learn in a university. It's in a typical university, it's through lectures inside a classroom with 30 or so students, or sometimes there'll be hundreds of students sitting together. So that's how you learn. The third element is how do you prove what you learned, which is the assessment. And it typically consists of either papers or examinations that you take at home. And then finally, there's the experience, which is everything you learn outside the classroom. This is your debate club, your cricket club, all your student organizations, your cultural group, the whole experience of learning outside of the classroom, which is for many people as valuable as what you learn inside the classroom, if not more. And then there's the research, which is increasingly becoming an important part of every university. Increasingly, you see professors are more focused on research than teaching and learning, and most universities are concerned about their research more than anything else. So it's a fundamental element of a university. And then finally, you get the degree, which is the certification, the verification, the proof that you went to a university and you learned something. And it's probably what most people go to university for. It's for that piece of paper, that degree that helps people get a job and improve their lives through learning. Now, let's talk about how this is being unbundled and changed by what's happening around the world. So first of all, the curriculum. The curriculum used to be sort of the stronghold of a university. You went to University of Toronto because you knew that you would get the best curriculum in the world that's been prepared by the best professors and the best administration. It used to be the distinguishing factor of a university. But now that's not the case anymore. You can access the curriculum of some of the best universities in the world for free, no matter where you are or how far you are or where in the world you exist. So we're familiar with Coursera and edX, which are 2 of the really popular MOOC platforms, which are taking content from the best universities in the world and democratizing them for anyone in the world to use whenever they want. FutureLearn is another example, which takes the curriculum of some of the best British universities and puts it online for anyone to use. So that's not a stronghold of universities anymore. It's available for free for anyone who wants to use it. Then let's talk about the experience. A lot of people went to university to get that experience because that's the only place where you could have access to those elements. But that's not the case anymore as well. If you look at how the world is congregating towards cities as the center of civilization, increasingly you can get access to the same opportunities, the same clubs, the same social circles in the ecosystem of a city that you would traditionally have to go to a university to get. And increasingly, there are also online players that are substituting for this provision of service that a university would provide. So some examples we have here are firstly meetup.com, where you can organize a group depending on what your interests are and get together with people within the same city. So you no longer need to join the university cricket team when you can organize a cricket team from the people around you and in your society. There's also Y Combinator, which is an incubator that's now providing a better experience for people who want to start a company than a university can ever provide. So we see that element of universities is being replaced. We also have down here Match.com. A lot of the journalists we talk to make the argument that a lot of elite institutions play as matchmaking organizations. But as we know, that's not the case for universities alone anymore. You can go on Match.com and meet people that way as well. Now, the teaching and learning. Previously, once again, you went to a professor at an elite institution because they can teach you really well. They have the best practices of pedagogy. They provided you with the experience that would last you for a lifetime. But now professors are really more concerned about their research than teaching students. And there's once again new innovative opportunities to get that same teaching and learning outside of universities. The examples we have here are Skillshare, where anyone can go and teach students or anyone else in the world whatever their expertise is or whatever their world-leading experts in. There's LearnRev, that's the same, to teach work relevant skills outside of the classroom, online, away from universities. So that's once again not something that's exclusive to universities. The assessment. Previously, your GPA was one of the most important factors that helped differentiate you and help you get a job. But now increasingly that's not as relevant as it used to be before. Some examples are firstly employers. Many employers around the world are now taking their own assessments as a prerequisite to getting a job because the university GPA and university assessment is not simply trusted anymore. There's the need for GREs and GMATs, which shows that universities don't trust their assessment themselves. They require these standardized assessments like GREs and GMATs to get into graduate programs. And then finally, there's new innovative startups which try to really assess the skill sets that you have as an individual and provide some new credentialing and badging that could one day add up to be worth as much as a degree is in the traditional context. Now the research, which once again is a valuable component of universities in some aspects, is now being given competition from players outside the academic space. So there's Brookings, there's Economic Intelligence Unit, which at least in the social sector space are arguably providing better research than any university out there. So that's also something you can get outside of universities, and you don't need an elite academic institution for. Then the students and faculty, which once had to be confined to the four walls of a university, be in the same setting, now can be anywhere in the world. Increasingly, the next generation is growing up on Skype, is growing up on video conferencing, and is blending the virtual and with the physical. So the need to be within the four walls and confines of a university to really learn is not relevant and will become increasingly less relevant as we go forward. And that brings us to the final bastion of universities, the degrees, the credentialing, the guarantee that you spent 4 years at an institution and got something at the end of it. We believe that that's becoming irrelevant as well. In today's world, people care more about what's on your LinkedIn profile than which university you went to. Employers need students to demonstrate skills at the workplace from day one. There's less and less emphasis on training students outside of university. So the degree itself, it's becoming pretty irrelevant as well. And you can get the same experiences outside of a university classroom, and that's increasingly the direction the world is heading towards. So if you look at the elements that we have described, you'll see that they are significantly being unbundled. And increasingly, there'll be innovative providers who are able to rebundle these elements together and provide better certification than a university degree. So that brings us to the next question, which is how will universities avoid ruin in the future? And I'll leave Michael to talk about that.
Well, thank you, Saad, and thanks to everybody at MaRS and in Toronto there for being there. It's a great and very, very important discussion. And as you can see, what we're arguing is that costs are rising, competition is becoming more global among universities, and now picking up Saad's point, this unbundling point means that each element of a university is potentially threatened by totally new competitors. And if you look at some other industries, what you see is that, for example, post offices aren't being undermined by competition among post offices, they're undermined by email. If you look at newspapers, the reason circulation in most newspapers is falling is not because of competition from other universities, it's because of new forms of communication. And the avalanche we're raising is maybe there are new threats, not just among the competition among universities, but from these other providers of some of what universities do. So you could get depressed about the avalanche coming, you could think it's all bad news, but actually what we argue is that the avalanche provides as much opportunity as threat. The thing to do when there's an avalanche coming is not to stand still, it's to keep moving, it's to look for new opportunities. There are 8 things I just want to briefly touch on. The first is, we're not arguing that relevance is everything. We're arguing that degrees such as medieval history, ancient Greek, have a perfect place in the new future. They have to be justified by the universities, they have to be explained, they have to be promoted, and indeed the new technologies can teach ancient Greek and medieval history just as well as they can teach other subjects. So we're talking about the intrinsic value of those things being important, but that has to be explained and justified by universities for them to survive. I believe they will very strongly. The second thing we're saying is distinctiveness matters. Each university needs to ask itself, what's so special about our university? Each university president needs to ask each department, what's so special about you? So each department, each university needs to justify its existence. Queen Mary University in the east of London does a wonderful course on the Blair administration, where because they're quite near London, they've attracted all the leading players in the Blair administration to come and give seminars. They've recorded those seminars. Every student who starts that course gets on an app on their iPad that has each of those interviews with each of the key players. That's very distinctive. Arizona State University has made its distinctiveness by choosing to do interdisciplinary areas. You can be distinctive in subject or approach, or the way in which you organise the university. Which leads to the third point, you can't please all of the students all of the time. So in thinking about distinctiveness, you also need to think about which kinds of students you want to attract. Students around the world are from all classes, all ages, they're global. Toronto knows this better than anywhere on the planet, with more than half its population born outside of Canada. But the challenge is for a university is to decide which of that vast, diverse array of students who have different lifestyles, different career aspirations, and different learning styles, as well as different subject interests, which ones are they going to try and appeal to, which ones are they going to try and attract. Which leads to the fourth point. A lot of the value added for a student, as Saad was saying, building on the points that he was making and indeed Katelyn was making earlier, will not be the content that you learn, it'll be the way in which you learn it. It'll be the quality of the teaching, it'll be the quality of mentorship, it'll be the way in which you learn and co-create knowledge between students, teachers and others on the university campus. So there's lots of room for potential there that all universities can exploit. The fifth point picks on this issue about the relationship between what people learn in universities and what they learn in the workforce. The theory-practice gap needs to be closed. We're not saying that theory doesn't matter, nor are we saying that practice is all that matters. We're saying that students need to get a bit of both, and the courses that teach both the learning and give work experience related to it are likely to be strong. We quote Katelyn's experience in Duke University of doing a course on Wall Street and then actually being involved in managing a Wall Street portfolio and being judged on that. That's the kind of thing that brings the theory and the practice together. Sixth point, the standard degree, the 3 to 4 year degree, is no longer standard. Saad was making the same point earlier. The idea that you learn for 3 or 4 years and then have a career for 35 years and then retire is vanishing before our eyes. So the pattern of work and learning needs to change, and that means universities need to experiment with different patterns of degrees. It may be a 2-year concentrated degree. It may be, as is now allowed by the funding system in the UK, that you could do a 3-year degree in 9 years part-time, building up modules as you go. But these patterns are going to change as people's need to reskill and develop and change career increases in number, and the numbers of people doing those things increase too. 7th point, the relationship between a city and a university, or a region and a university, is increasingly important to the future of universities. You know this because the UT is so centrally important to Toronto itself, as indeed are the other universities in the region. But thinking through the relationship between, say, Stanford and Silicon Valley, or Harvard and MIT and Boston, or UCL in Britain and the east of London, where it's building a whole new campus, betting that after the Olympics, after Canary Wharf, and with the huge growth of Tech City and innovation and startup, that will be a great place for a new university campus to be. These are the crucial relationships that need to be built out. And that leads to my final point. As the monopoly on degrees breaks down, the point that Saad was making at the end there, the universities need to think through the true value, the intrinsic value of the learning they offer, of the experience they offer, of the content they offer, of the relationships they build, and of the way they set people up for their life beyond the university, in work, and of course outside of work in their own fulfillment, whatever that might be. So these are all ways in which universities, including traditional universities, not all online universities, can seize the opportunities the future provides. Over to you, Katelyn.
Thanks, Michael. So just quickly, we'll wrap up by talking about what are so based on the implications that Saad's laid out, well, the argument that Saad's laid out and the implications that Michael has just gone through, we saw that there were about 5, but potentially more models of new bundles of education, or new bundles of universities that we thought would probably emerge. You know, the first is that the elite university is not going to go away. Harvard, Oxford, MIT, Stanford, a university with a large endowment, global brand, historic significance, and famous alumni is likely still going to be able to attract top academic thinkers, talented students, and large government research grants. We're not arguing that these universities will go away. In fact, they may even become more elite and more prevalent. These universities will probably still need to be able to change, will still need to change, however. Technology will be a bigger component of the learning process, and as we are seeing, MOOCs will actually enable and further allow these universities to extend their reach by becoming the go-to source of content and curriculum. This will disrupt the entire ecosystem and put the pressure, at least for the content, curriculum, and learning, from the other 90% of the players in the current university space. The second model that we identified is mass universities. So mass universities, what we thought were those that will be able to take the globally best-in-class content and adapt it to their own studies to provide a strong education for the rapidly growing global middle class. So they may use the courses from Coursera, edX, from Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and adapt them in a new bundle for their larger mass proportion. These universities will likely increasingly be blended, they'll be customized to individual students, and likely have a greater practicum or hands-on component. Outside of formal class time, there'll probably be increased sort of professional skill development from in professions such as dentistry, medicine, and law, to more future-oriented skills such as startup incubators and even design spaces such as MaRS. Many of the second and third tier universities that currently service this space or this demographic will likely cease to exist because they will lack the distinctiveness to be able to compete with the mass university, and they won't be able to compete on this scale. The third model of the future we found is the niche universities. There will still be a place for students who seek a very particular experience and a very specific goal from their higher education. They'll still be able to find it. The institutions who are niche universities will largely be truly distinctive and tailored to their market segment. Examples of these universities include the US liberal arts colleges, such as Oberlin or or Williams that have very small enrollments and a high emphasis on teaching and learning. They might also include things like the Rhode Island School for Design, globally known for its niche in a particular vocation. The fourth model we identified are local universities. So there are many universities that will still play a vital role in local or regional economies and develop skills particularly relevant for that economy. The IITs in India are a great example of this. They're excellent technical schools with almost entirely, I think entirely Indian faculty and entirely Indian students. They were set up by the government and remain close to nation-building goals. There are similar institutions like those across the developing world. Those institutions likely won't go away, and they'll continue to service the niches that they provide. And while content and curriculum may be globalized, the delivery of the learning or the facilitation of that in practice will likely be also remain local. We've seen this model rise up in Brazil, actually, in the form of UNISA or Anhanguera. They often maintain a central hub and then from a large global city, and then have regional centers that are able to spread out. And they're local. And then the final model the final model of the future university are lifelong learning mechanisms. And by this we mean whether it's badges, Coursera end of course credits, Skillshare, online portfolios, no longer can we expect to learn all we need for a lifetime from a university degree. And while refresher courses and professional certifications aren't new, they'll increasingly be seen as a go-to option of higher education. And we think that these options will be more prevalent, more accessible, and more easily demonstrated. They will provide credibility to those seeking skills and trying to demonstrate them for employment opportunities. So the aftermath. From what we've seen today, we think there are many key lessons for governments, universities, students, and entrepreneurs to continue to change with respect to the Avalanche. We look forward to discussing these with you in the Q&A. But in the end, we really think that the combination of marketization, that is, that the student is going to be the driving decision maker in educational choices, and the pressures of globalization will lead universities to be less contained within national systems and more likely to become unbundled from their traditional encompassing functions. For institutions, deciding to embrace this new world may turn out to be the only way to avoid the avalanche that is coming. Just as the avalanche shapes the mountain, so will the changes ahead fundamentally alter the landscapes for universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, Katelyn, and Saad. That was excellent. Our next speaker is David Naylor. David has been president of the University of Toronto since 2005. He earned his MD at Toronto in 1978, followed by a Doctor of Philosophy in Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. David completed his clinical specialty training and joined the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto in 1988. He was founding Chief Executive Officer of the Institute. You want me to stop? It goes on, though. It's really impressive. I will stop. You could read it online. And I'll just let him speak.
Thanks, Krista. Thank you very much, Krista. It's so great to be back at MaRS. And Katelyn, thank you and your colleagues for the fabulous presentation. That reference to connections to cities and to incubation is so pertinent for us here in Toronto. Obviously, University of Toronto was one of the founding partners of MaRS. I recall as Dean of Medicine throwing $50,000 into the kitty before there was a kitty. Because we all believe so firmly in this concept, and to see what's here now and to see how it's transformed our ecosystem is absolutely fabulous. I want to start by being a bit mischievous because I listened to this call to snowfall with both real sympathy and concurrence, but also a few evil thoughts. I want to start by noting that Saad went to Yale and Katelyn went to Duke. They paid $50,000 a year, I would guesstimate, just for the tuition. And yet there's a big emphasis on affordability and a crisis of affordability. Maybe those numbers about the rise in cost of higher education aren't generalizable to Canada. In fact, I can tell you they aren't. And maybe we need to think about segmenting markets between those that are publicly assisted versus those that operate in the private endowment model with strong tuition reliance. And I would add to that one interesting point, and that is this report, which has so many great things in it, highlights the growing gap between the rich and the poor on our hot and crowded planet. But it doesn't talk about the reality that without stronger public support, we won't have much in the way of a system of higher education, mass or otherwise, for that rising middle class to access. And so it is useful, I think, here in Canada, not least in Ontario, where there are essentially no private universities, to remember that there is not only a local ecosystem, but in the best of Canadian traditions, to remember that we're in a world where there are hundreds of millions of people in poverty for whom any access to higher education is a challenge. And so the democratization theme here is such an important one. But there's another sting in the tail here too, I think. When I talk to immigrant parents who sent their children to Canadian universities, including the one I'm privileged to lead for a few more months, their aspiration is that those children have a degree from a fine institution with some reputation. Their aspiration is that those students have the on-campus experience. And for those who think that we should move away from that into the mass model, I understand that fully. I had the privilege last night of hosting a dinner for Dr. Sam Petroda, chair of the Knowledge Commission of India, in one of his many incarnations. Sam's commission recommended the thin university as a model for India, much more reliance on online learning. But when you talk to individuals in these nations, you also understand there is the same problem that bedevils our system, and that is the aspiration for the ivy-colored walls, the social network, the in-person experiences. So none of this is simple. None of this is simple. I also want to take on briefly the jobs without people and people without jobs meme. You know, this reminds me of what's happened with the innovation agenda, at least in this country. Business told us for years how terrible universities were at commercialization. And then suddenly it became clear higher education R&D spending was among the highest in the OECD, subsidized by universities at an unprecedented level, coming out of the undergraduate classroom. It was business in Canada, ladies and gentlemen, that was the laggard, with some of the lowest R&D spending in the OECD. One wonders in this new meme of higher education, how much of this is business deciding in this highly technical and skilled world that they should maximize their dividends and those fancy salaries for the people in the C-suite by not investing in education for their employees. Again, none of this is simple. So with those somewhat mischievous opening comments, let me go back to my prepared text. I couldn't resist. First, as I said, I thought this was a terrific report. And I want to deal with the unbundling from another aspect because there's so much that's important in this report. I hope everyone has read it. If you haven't, please get it. It's a quick read. It's a very worthwhile read. I want to talk about unbundling from the standpoint of mission and mandate, skills and competencies, and digital teaching and learning. I'm going to be very quick. Mission and mandate. This is such a critical issue because, as many of you will know, we need a differentiated system with different roles for different institutions, particularly in a publicly assisted system such as our own. And this goes against the grain of so much that we hear and see, because everyone believes their alma mater should be deeply in the research and graduate studies game. It's not affordable. Worldwide experience makes it clear it's not affordable. This report underscores it. That business model doesn't work. And yet there are so many pressures, social pressures, faculty unions, and dare I say it, public policymakers who talk about differentiation, but always are unable to deliver at the final analysis. What wins in public policy? Well, there's a swing riding here. There's a charming, smooth-spoken university president there, dishing out the usual nostrums and talking in a trendy way. There's a budget crisis. There's a bureaucratic imperative to level down. And somehow we don't get to grips with what, when you talk to public policy leaders and you talk to our best public servants, some in the room, what they want to do, somehow it just doesn't happen. We have a big challenge in Ontario and in Canada to embrace differentiation and to get away from mandate creep and figure out a system that works. And jurisdictions from China to California have realized this, and Canada, so long as it doesn't do it, will lag not only in quality of education, but in success in research. Let me remind this audience, easy bellwether for that, we haven't had a Nobel Prize in Canada since 1993. Tomorrow we'll be conferring an honorary doctorate on Robert Birgeneau. Berkeley's had 4 Nobel Prizes since Bob became president. We are lagging. We will not compete and win in fundamental scholarship and science unless we differentiate our universities. And yet, as the report notes, there is this kind of migration phenomenon. Everyone wants to be like Harvard, or here in Canada, it might be like some of the research intensives. And yet there are so many other important mandates that universities could fulfill. And exactly as the report says, these ranking systems are a big problem. They do not reward teaching and learning. And here I want to jump to that other theme of teaching and learning. You know, part of the problem is we don't yet know how to deal with teaching and learning and measure it well. When people use student-faculty ratios, it's such a weak proxy for teaching excellence. So crude. On one level, the mass university, if we believe it is a necessity or at least a stage of evolution, is very important. What's the student-faculty ratio in a MOOC with an enrollment of 100,000? Not very good. And yet, if we look at alternatives, retention and graduation rates, I guess that's okay, but we've already heard a warning about grade inflation and moving people along. Academic peer assessment, that sounds like another proxy for reputation. Competency testing, well, what competencies? You know, we have a lot of pressure for objective documentation of learning outcomes, but they're a lot harder to measure than things like publication or citation counts. And as one example, we've heard our friends from Pearson highlight the attributes we need in the next generation of graduates. Creativity or ingenuity, resilience, optimism, open-mindedness, collaborative spirit, entrepreneurialism. Try measuring those on a multiple choice test. So there's a lot to be done. To me, you know, we'll someday get to the point where the best ranking system for world-class teaching will be a 10 to 15 year lag before you look at what the graduates are doing and what they've made of their lives. Because I don't know what else really matters. And of course, the elite universities will continue to pick the best people like Katelyn and they'll look great. It's a cohort effect no matter what they do. Let me use that as a segue to skills and competencies. I thought this was very well handled in the report. The folks from Pearson understand that it's not simply about skills. It's not simply about technical competencies. And that line about relevance not being everything is so important. You know, the challenges we are confronting on this planet are unpredictable. I've said many times they range from cybersecurity and what chilling news in the newspapers the last couple of days about everything being under surveillance, to climate change, the issue of global pandemics, you name it. These are complex problems in which the social intersects with the technological and scientific. So we do need a different type of graduate, and the phrase that I continue to like is the so-called T-shaped individual, right? This is the person with deep specific expertise, and there is on top of it substantial breadth and perspective. And The expertise could be anything, engineering, economics, English, or epidemiology, but the breadth of perspective is what we need for these students to succeed in this complicated world. And again, my worry is, how do you get that breadth of perspective, those important renewable competencies, without in-person interaction? And I could go on. We've worked very hard on some of these competencies at the University of Toronto. One of our largest faculties talks about specific objectives of quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, effective writing and communications, problem solving, ethical and social reasoning. We believe these are competencies not just for a job, but for citizenship and for a lifetime. But how easily they can be inculcated through a MOOC is a little uncertain to me. So this is part of our reality. Facts are cheap, we know that, but people who can generate ideas and think creatively are priceless. And finding a way in higher education to meet the challenge of the Pearson report and create those kinds of graduates is a huge issue for us. Final item on my agenda is this digital trend of MOOCs, which the report alludes to, I think very appropriately, as a big thing in play. Is it an avalanche? Is it a dusting of snow? I don't know. And I would argue no one's quite sure what MOOCs mean right now. We are involved at U of T in Coursera and edX. We have had 400,000 students enrolled in MOOCs. That's 80% of the total number of living alumni of the University of Toronto. It's a bit of a change for us. And yet we are not doing these for credit. That's the model. Free access, no formal evaluation. Georgia Tech, many of you will know, has recently taken a big step forward, $7,000 for an online master's in computer science. They say it will be as rigorous as the one that costs 6 times as much for out-of-state students in person. And what everyone is wondering is, are they undercutting themselves? Will this be a 2-tier system of graduates? Will employers be interested in whether you got it by a MOOC or in person? Unknown. It's a whole brave new world with MOOCs. Digital tools, I am confident, will make a huge difference to higher education. In fact, one of the big questions is whether they are tools at all, right? We think of tools as things we use. If we can say so in the city, and speaking from the university that spawned Marshall McLuhan, maybe using the tool changes things. Maybe the medium changes everything. And that much we are still figuring out as we use these online tools. But I will say that many of the things that we need to do in terms of competencies for our students are hard to inculcate or imagine with MOOCs. Digital tools can help, but it still seems to me you need in-person interaction. And I think of it this way. We have a big commitment at the university to small seminar courses. We do that because we think young people learn well together. And there's something about an exchange in a small group when your arguments get shredded. And the next time that happens, when you come to class, you may be inclined either to make your arguments more effectively or to seek the most important piece of human geography, common ground, with others in your seminar group. In brief, I thought this was a provocative, beautifully crafted report. There is a great deal for us to learn, lots more for us to discuss. I am not one who can prognosticate about whether avalanches are coming or not. What I do think is very much the case is we're in a period of very exciting accelerated change in every sphere of human existence. The same will be true for higher education, and I look forward to the further conversation. Thank you very much, Krista. The ghost in the machine.
So now's your turn to get involved. We have a couple of mics around the room.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I have a question, I think David probably, when it comes to this jobs without people, people without jobs. I like that. It's very simple. how do we also look at not only the requirement of business to train, but is there any link to if they paid a certain wage that there would be an incentive for people to take those jobs? I mean, is anybody doing sort of work in that area, looking at the salaries that are being offered in this, as an incentive?
Alison, I don't know all the models that are out there. What I do know is that we're seeing in every labor market more and more interest in these blended learning options that see people in the classroom, in a college or a university, and in the workplace part-time. Some are formal co-op, others are very informal, involving practica and experiential learning. And more interest, particularly when you're dealing with graduate students or professional program students, in some form of compensation blended in. So that the models are getting more and more pluralistic. This is consistent with what our friends from Pearson are telling us. There is an unbundling that involves even the modes of, what used to be traditionally the co-op experience or the practicum. I do, like many others, worry about the sort of freebie mentality. Internships are valuable, but with so many young people doing these unpaid internships, it becomes a bit of a worry again as to this kind of problem. And I am a friend of business. Let me hasten to add, but the entitled employer thing worries me as another theme of our time. Right? I have a job on offer. I want the Stepford baccalaureate or master's candidate to fit that job and arrive job ready and perfectly skilled. And I think we have to understand that this phase of change is so intense in the global economy, in the workplace, in every way, that there will be these dislocations, and avoid scapegoating either employers on the one hand or higher education institutions on the other. This is a complicated period of disruption, and everything's coming apart in a kind of interesting but alarming way.
Okay, since no one else is standing up, I have one more question, which is, I have to give a convocation address. It's my first time ever at a college. Give me one piece of advice.
Katelyn.
So, I mean, one of the books that we relied heavily on, or one of the concepts we relied heavily on when writing this paper, was that young people today are like, everyone has to kind of remain in this permanent beta state, as said by Reid Hoffman and Ben Kasnoka, and that I think it's about ingraining young people with a mentality that they need to embrace change and see that they're living in a dynamic environment and prepare themselves for that, as opposed to think that they can rigidly go through a hierarchical structure and that those are dead.
That's good. I was on that theme, so thank you very much. Thank you very much. No problem.
Can I just jump in and add, I love this permanent beta idea because it's actually completely opposite of this nonsense about the perfectly skilled graduate. Right? These are like this. We're all going to have to look to a generation coming after us in which people will be doing the skill renewal throughout their lives. They'll have multiple periods of reskilling. And that's why I love one thing in the Pearson report about lifelong learning. And again, I wish there'd been more elaboration about the reality that the lifelong learning isn't just, old farts like me coming back after retirement and learning, medieval Latin. So it's about starting at age 35 and saying, wow, I actually need a whole new set of skills to reinvent myself. And this is a huge opportunity for universities to seize or not. Right? Some will have to decide not to do it. But it's a really dynamic period, and this permanent beta state is I'm going to crib that, plagiarize it shamelessly, the sincerest form of academic flattery.
Not mine. I think that's a really good point. And I just wanted to say that I think that picks up on one of the central themes that we have throughout our paper, is that students are going to need to take personal responsibility for their own learning. So they're going to need to think, what is the bundle that is going to get me to where I want to be? And so if you go to a school like the University of Toronto or Duke or wherever, students are going to need to think from day one, what are all the resources that I'm going to take advantage of? And they're going to come up with vastly different values to their degree or to their experience than just kind of going through. You can't just, sit down with your mentor and plow through the standard, 10 course set anymore. Instead, you need to think, what are the experiences I'm getting? What mentorship relationships am I building with professors or other people in like the ecosystem? What are my extracurricular activities, and how does that shape me as an individual, which all leads to that.
Can I chip in on this? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, just want to chip in on something connecting what you've just been talking about and a remark David made earlier on. And by the way, I really appreciate the thoughtful commentary, David. Many things I'd love to debate with you either now or at some point, but it's great to have such a commentary. One of the things you emphasise, which I think we would like to emphasise too, is the on-campus experience for those who want it is a great opportunity. And as Katelyn has just been saying, it's a question of how you seize it. We give a really good example in the and Avalanche is coming of Exeter University in the UK, which is one of the UK's top 10 or 15 universities. Really good academic track record. They've redesigned the campus in the last 15 years, right at the centre of the campus, so you can't avoid going to the campus and miss it. You can't go through the campus and miss it, is the employability centre. It's not the careers centre stuck in some dowdy back corner of the campus. It's right in the middle in a beautiful building. They write to you before you start your course, exactly as Katelyn was saying. They say, here are 6 times in your 3 years at Exeter, you should check in with us if you want to make sure that you're employable when you leave, as well as getting a good degree. And in the same centre, they organise all the volunteering in the local community abroad. Everything through Exeter's volunteering is done there. 15% of all volunteering in UK universities is run out of Exeter. And they're thinking exactly in the way that Katelyn described. Let's make the university campus a really great experience. Let's focus it on employability as well as getting a good degree and making friends in the social capacity. I think it's a beautiful example of what's required in the 21st century.
Great.
And I would add to these comments in a similar vein, and my advice for your speech would be to tell students to not be complacent. As David and Katelyn attributed, it's a very different world now. Previously, you would go and join GE after graduating, and you would stay there your entire life. But increasingly in the employment space, you're either changing employers every 2 years, or increasingly people are moving into contractual employment where you basically change employers almost monthly. And the same thing is happening in the university space. You can't go to a university and expect that the rest of your life is sorted. You increasingly have to find out what you're passionate about, make your own opportunities, be kind of an entrepreneur as Reid Hoffman talks about in Startup of You, and try to figure out your own pathway.
I'll ask over here. You were first up.
Hi, is this who?
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Greg. I'm from the university organization called Students Offering Support. And this is a question for all of you, but I'd love to get your lens, David, on the kind of Canadian perspective. But it seems like that there is change happening, but we also know that universities move quite slowly. So with, especially in Canada, the pressures from students to avoid, deregulation and prices of tuition going up, but also you're not seeing that much more money from the government kind of coming in to support, and the costs are rising so great. What's the inflection point? What's a change that we're going to see to illustrate, or what do you suspect to see 5, 10, a big structural change? What's going to pop, or what do you think the first thing that is going to change to really give us some sort of indication that change has to come, is coming, will come? Yeah.
I think it's directed towards you.
That's right. We don't have $50,000 a year tuitions, do we? I think the inflection point is going to start when you see much more reliance on inverted classrooms. My sense is that based on what we're already seeing at U of T, and based on survey data as well, MOOCs are not just a delivery mechanism. That profs are using them to assess how they present, to reinvent how they present more, and become more effective with infographics and line drawings and all kinds of tools that just change the presentation and enliven it. but also we are seeing the anticipated effect of inversion, where the profs may actually use their own MOOC to deliver the lecture. And that can be delivered, in the coffee shop, it can be delivered at home, stay in bed, do it on your laptop, whatever. You can stop, start. But the classes themselves become large tutorials and problem-solving sessions that complement small tutorials. And at some point, some of those big classes won't happen at all. And I think that we will see a move to much more in the way of inverted classrooms that will change us away from this big class lecture model. And I also anticipate a lot more peer tutorials and peer mentorship will be part of that shift. That's point one. Point two, the other big change that I think has to happen, and it's so hard for Canadians to go there, is to actually differentiate the system. We won't have California with its three-tiered system, colleges, well articulated with universities, teaching-oriented universities up to professional masters, and then 11 or 10 research intensives that are among the best in the world. But some system that says, let's be clear about the fact that institutions do different things is essential, and that's going to mean an end to this 40-40-20 model. The current aspiration, the current standard is 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% other. And when you look at what's coming out of the 40% research in a variety of institutions, the taxpayers aren't getting value for money. And yet it's defended, of course, as the norm. It's the Harvard norm. When we start to move away from that and see more teaching stream faculty, valued and respected as full colleagues, when we see more teaching-oriented universities, valued and respected as the Swarthmore and Amherst of Canada, then I think we'll have broken the back of this problem. But until those two things happen, I think we're going to have this terrible nexus of government unable to spend more, students unhappy about paying more, and universities caught with the wage and price escalation in the middle.
Can I reinforce that? I think David's actually expressed that extremely well. And Canada is a fabulous country with a population on the whole strongly supportive of a public sector, and some universities that traditionally have been very, very strong. But the cost pressures on students and governments are there, even though Canada came through the financial and economic crisis better than many countries around the world. And there is no future anywhere in the world of the government spending more and more to subsidize more and more students to higher quality through. So unless you can break this cost quality conundrum that we set out in the report and show you can flip the teaching model and get higher quality for less cost, and so make the experience cheaper for students, but educationally as valuable, we've got a real problem. And you see examples of that. I mentioned Exeter University a moment ago. Their study centre is as busy at 2 a.m. as it is at 2 p.m. now, because students are studying at different times of day and night. Nanyang Technical University that Saad visited records pretty much all the lectures they do. They have them in a bank. You can watch them any time, and they monitor the use, and often it's just before exams, not needless to say, but it's at all kinds of time of day, so people aren't necessarily going to the lectures anymore. They're looking at the lectures when they want to look at them, and then the teaching can change dramatically and be a mentoring relationship or the kind of small group that David talked about. So I think the model has to change for cost reasons, but actually potentially for educational quality reasons as well.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, my name is Anastasia, and I found your talks really interesting, especially from the perspective of a student. Like from inside the system, you can't really see that there's an avalanche coming and that there's big changes about. And it's also really fascinating to see that there's a room full of people interested in making higher education better. I was wondering if, in your own minds, there's a university or an institution that's currently doing higher education right, kind of like a thought leader or an action leader among them, and what exactly are they doing right?
Well, I think there's a couple of good examples that we cited throughout, such as the University of Exeter that Michael talked about. But what I think you have to come back to thinking through first, what is it that you want to achieve, and what is it that the student wants, and that they need to go for something very distinctive so the institutions that are moving towards greater distinctiveness along those spectrums, I think are doing better. So like whether it's Exeter and its employability center, whether it's Harvard and MIT starting with edX, Stanford, which yes, has Coursera and Udacity, but also has their own system of online teaching and learning. I think that the more distinctive you are, the better. I think that the more, there was a really interesting graduation speech that I read recently by Drew Houston at MIT, who said, you need to go to the city or the place where everyone is doing the thing that you want to do. Like, you need to be surrounded in the ecosystem of the best people possible. And so I think that, and we've taken a lot of the ideas from Richard Florida, who's, I think, a University of Toronto professor, in terms of his creative class and the relationship with cities and prosperity, and thinking, you have to think outside the walls of a traditional university structure and go to the sort of ecosystems where what it is that you want to achieve is. And so within that, I would say that, startups like General Assembly have done a really good job of providing very tactical courses to begin to build into specific ecosystems that are highly sought after by young people.
So I think there's several universities doing some really innovative things, and I'll give an example of a few which are some of my favorites along the spectrum. So firstly, universities that are increasingly tied into employability and entrepreneurship, I think, are going in exactly the right direction. So David referenced the partnership with MaRS that University of Toronto has, which I think is really unique, and universities that are focusing on those kind of partnerships are really preparing themselves for the future. The other thing that's interesting is some universities like Western Governors University are shifting to a more competency-based certification as opposed to certifying based on how much time you spent in the classroom. So as an example, when you enter a Bachelor's of Economics course, suppose you've been running a small business for 3 years, and in the course of that, you do have some basic understanding of accountancy and basic understanding of businesses. So WGU will actually assess your competencies, and maybe you'll get that degree in 1 year instead of 4 because you had those skills outside of the classroom. So I think those kind of models where you're being rewarded a degree not based on how much time you spent sitting in a classroom, but the intrinsic skills that you have, regardless of where you got them, whether from a MOOC or from the real world or from learning from your uncle. I think that's a really innovative, creative model. And then finally, I think reinforcing David's point earlier, universities that are picking what they're distinctive at and not trying to do everything, I think are really moving in the right direction. So a university that says, I don't care about the research rankings, I care about the quality of students I produce, and is delivering better teaching experiences at lower cost, but saying, fine, we won't do research. I think that's also very, very creative and forward thinking, and there's many liberal arts colleges in the US that fall into that mold.
Great, thank you.
I would just cite the big little three on the east coast of Canada. St. Francis Xavier, Mount Allison, and Acadia. All tiny, all liberal arts schools in the Swarthmore, Amherst, Williams tradition, all offering superb undergraduate education, and all with faculty, many of whom are active scholars, but who have a particular emphasis and time commitment in the direction of undergraduate teaching. I think those three are interesting models. Tough to scale, right? As soon as you grow them, you lose the magic. But Canada would be so much better off if we had, 50 like that, so that we would have the option and young people could say, I want that kind of experience, or I want the big city, comprehensive urban experience that is certainly the case for the Toronto-based universities. But give people more choices. And I think many of those smaller institutions are very efficient at delivering a great undergraduate education.
I think on the answering the question from the mass point of view, the second of the models Katelyn set out, I think what we found since publishing the report is there's a lot of enthusiasm for exploiting the new opportunities in the emerging markets and the developing world. So We've heard from people in Malaysia who want to seize the opportunity. We've heard from people in Pakistan who want to seize the opportunity. A year ago, Katelyn and I visited universities in Brazil that see these opportunities. And I think one of the potential benefits of the unbundling phase and the uncertainty that David described in his opening remarks is that well-led universities in the developing world will seize these opportunities and bring higher education innovation to the rest of the world.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Travis. I really like the way you unbundled sort of the university. I was wondering if you could sort of extend that concept and talk a little bit about unbundling the curriculum, particularly linear content. So when you think of algebra, STEM disciplines, chemistry, things that are very straightforward path in terms of concepts you learn, how do you see MOOCs solving, let's say for instance, a student learning from home versus in the classroom? How do you solve the problem of students being motivated to go through all that linear content and actually learning it in a MOOC? Because I think typically today MOOCs are bundled with a larger number of concepts altogether, which is heavy on the cognitive load for one to learn and reduces retention, right? So if you can maybe talk a little bit about that. So I'm playing devil's advocate with, I guess, the concept of MOOC here.
Sure. So that's a really good question. And I think one challenge that I see with MOOCs right now is they're trying to take the classroom experience and just import this online. And I think that's not the ideal way to think about it. Being online gives us the flexibility to completely reshape that experience. So as an example, now that if you move online, you no longer need one lecture, a 50-minute lecture that explains all these concepts in a linear way. You can think of detaching that into lots of small pieces that are fitted to a person's needs. Similarly, you don't need everyone in the classroom sitting and learning the same stuff at the same level. Because it's all online, you maybe know a bit more about algebra than I do, so you can start at a higher level than I can. So I think firstly, supporting your point, I think MOOCs haven't realized the full potential of this unbundling so far. And I think the full potential of this unbundling would firstly mean a lot more personalization that will take the experience beyond what you can have inside a classroom. So I would, great assessment that accurately tells me what my starting point is and then helps me progress in a way that keeps me interesting. So the personalization is one point. And then the second point is also about making things interesting, making experiences more interactive. So how can we, instead of transferring knowledge through one-way instruction, how can we add gamification to it? How can we add different elements using the possibilities of the digital world? So I think there's even better opportunities for unbundling in the future. It's not being captured right now to its full extent.
Thank you.
Could I just underscore that?
Of course.
I think Saad is absolutely right. We're in an era of brain science right now, where it's actually possible to design a lot of these techniques to make them much more sticky for students. The personalization could be abetted by pretty simple artificial intelligence algorithms. This is not, challenging in many ways. It can be done through the cloud. And I think there's massive potential here to make some of the most difficult content, the most linear and dense content, actually easier. The final piece is just, if we can find more in the way of problem-based learning around many of these apparently concept-rich and linear subjects, it just makes it so much easier for students to grasp. And again, because you don't just have someone standing in front of a class droning on. You've got the chance to make this stuff come to life and to create problems, and then further to that term that seems to be the leitmotif, unbundle them in ways that show how each of the concepts come together to make the problem soluble. So I'm actually really excited about the potential for digital methods to change delivery in a positive way and to really transform it.
Okay, so I think these will be our last two questions because we're coming up on probably quite late for Michael and Saad in London right now. So I'll get them to bed soon.
Hi. It's okay, the adrenaline is flowing.
We're glad for keeping you awake.
Hi, my name is E, and I'm from Fora. I have two quick questions. So the first question, we've really been focusing a lot on the Canadian case for higher education, but my question is mostly about the fact that higher education is now beginning to become mainstream in a lot of other places. So, for example, we work in Africa where penetration is still at 6%. And we're one of the few startups working to raise that up to 30% by the end of the decade. And what mistakes did universities here in the West make that universities that are now beginning to get engaged in higher education should not make? That's my first question. And my second question is, what is the University of Toronto trying to achieve by offering MOOCs? Like, what is the metric of success for University of Toronto being engaged in offering MOOC courses? That's pretty much it.
So I can start with question number one. I've done quite a bit of work in emerging market K-12 and then university systems, and I think the key mistake that to not make, especially in Africa, is to first make the content and curriculum extremely tailored to the vocation, to what it is that people are trying to achieve. I think in the West we've kind of we've spun this narrative that everyone needs to have a university education, and as long as that's a bachelor's degree of some variety, as long as it's something, then that's success. And what that's really done is it's created a lot of really kind of like worthless degrees in third-tier universities that aren't worth the paper that they're written on. And I think that when building something in emerging markets, you have to be very sort of tactical and focused about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then also making it very skills-based and mindset-based, because often you're changing a mindset away. Like, students have come through a K-12 system that is based on rote learning, and so they think that the economy, or they are expecting some sort of command control rote learning system. And so to build in so peer-to-peer learning, group work, like practice from the very beginning is really important.
Can I add on that question? I think if you go back over the 100 years of universities, even the last 50 years of universities, many in the West, actually access wasn't totally on merit. So one of the things I would insist on is access to universities on merit, and make sure right from early on that you build up scholarship funds that make it truly on merit, academic merit and ability to succeed. One of our collective, I think all three of us think one of our favourite universities is the Lahore University of Management Sciences in Lahore, a really beautiful university campus that is only 25 years old. They've absolutely insisted from day one, in the middle of a quite challenging society, on access on merit. Over 40% of the students are now on scholarships, and they're finding those students from all over the school system and supporting them, not just from the moment they apply to the university, but through the last 2 or 3 years of school, so they give them a real opportunity of passing the entrance exam.
My advice would be to try to tie into the needs of the workforce and employment as much as possible. Like, there's 75 million unemployed people around the world, and a recent study showed that 40% of employers think that the graduates coming out of universities are not ready for the workforce. So there's this huge disconnect between the needs of the workforce and what's being taught in the university. And if you're building a system from the scratch, if you design the system to address those needs, to help fix those 75 million unemployed people around the world, then I think you'll be set up for success.
Okay, so maybe we'll move on here.
Hi, my name is Elise. I'm from McMaster University. Thank you very much for this presentation. I found it really interesting. I have two questions as well. The first one is involving the assessment piece. You talked a lot about moving towards looking at students' skills and capabilities and competencies in terms of being more reflective of the students that will be entering the workforce and the real world, pretty much. And I was wondering, especially looking at issues such as grade inflation and the unreliability of student ratings, how you see the role of assessments and GPAs changing to better reflect students' skills as well as their capabilities. And my second question is, what are your suggestions for students who are interested in facilitating this process and communicating their needs to their institutions to help for future students who are coming into universities not only in Canada but globally?
So I can start off on that. I think that what we're seeing is that so the truth is there's what today looks like and what the future state looks like. So I think so that many entry-level jobs still use GPA as a really crude proxy to shift through resumes and like filter people up to the top. But it's going to get you in the pile. It's not going to get you a job. And what we would say is that the assessment increasingly is done by employers have invented their own assessment. So when I graduated from university, I went to McKinsey, and one of the first things that you do is a problem-solving test, and then an intensive interview process. And so, the GPA was one of 50 things that they looked at to determine who went through that initial process. But then it was how you performed on that problem-solving test and how you performed in an interview. So you have to be prepared for those steps. You can't be just prepared for the output indicators of your university. And then I would say, again, I think that people in general just need to think about what it is that they're trying to achieve, what job is it that they want, and be extremely tailored to that. I run an emerging market venture fund at Pearson that invests in chains of low-cost private schools. Very rarely has anyone emailed me with a really thoughtful question about what it is that we do, or hey, I'm really interested in the affordable learning space. I'd love to learn more. I'd be happy to have one of those conversations, but no one has emailed me. And my advice to young people is if you want a job, don't go look on a job board and say submit your resume to 100 different places. Think about what it is that you really want to do, and then thoughtfully approach the people who are in the field that are doing that, and think about what value you can add to them. If someone from the University of Toronto came to me and said, I'm really passionate about low-cost education, I see that one of your portfolio companies is in Ghana, maybe I could do a bit of research on different innovative models, I'd be yeah, that sounds great, let's continue the conversation, but no one has ever emailed me that. And I've heard people, my friends that employ people or are doing interesting things say similar stories. And I guess that would be, so my advice would be, I think that universities need to actively instill that mindset into their students, and students should take upon themselves the self-knowledge that that's what it's going to take to get a job, is that you're going to need to look at who are the people who are doing the things that you want to do and think about what value you can provide to them. Maybe initially it's free. And I think that gets to a bit of the internship point as well, as students who apply to blind internships that are often unpaid can be slave labor. But if you say, look, I think you have this problem and here's how I can help you solve it, then your internship's probably going to be a lot more valuable, and it's going to be tailored on a real world problem. And so I think it's those sort of that sort of mindset. And I think that there's a large sort of swaths of materials out there for students or young people or even mid-career people to access. I mean, I think Ben and Reid Hoffman's book is excellent. Lean In from Sheryl Sandberg is really good. There's this website called the Daily Muse that has career articles. If you go on LinkedIn, people are giving advice all the time. I think just immersing yourself into the ecosystem of people who are at the forefront of big growing companies is the advice that I would have. And I guess the one final point on that is that one of the constraints of the traditional university is that most of the vast majority of the employees are academics whose advice to you is going to be tailored to producing future academics. And so students need to take greater initiative, or universities need to, it's both sides, both universities and students need to take greater initiative in finding practitioners to bring into the classrooms, like whether they're professors of the practice that have like links to real industry and can give real advice to like career paths that are out there, and students need to branch out from the traditional academic walls and approach people who are doing real things.
So to your point on assessment, I think assessments around the universities are also going to go through a revolution pretty soon. So traditionally, you take a set of MCQ exams, write a bunch of papers, take some exams, and you get a GPA at the end. But in the future, I think assessment will look radically different, and it will actually assess the skills that you have accumulated over the course of your degree. So one story I like to tell is there was this football club in Azerbaijan that was looking for a new manager, and they had applications from this person who had played football in the Premier League, was a well-known name. But instead of choosing him as their manager, they chose this 25-year-old kid who performed really well in the Football Manager video game. So you can see that concept and how that can apply to university assessment systems as well, where your GPA is going to be less relevant, and what will be more relevant is how you can demonstrate your ability to do certain things in the real world. And this will be proved both through new forms of assessment in the university that are able to measure that, but also other ways of building a portfolio of the abilities you have that take what you can do and what your achievements are beyond that two-digit number into something that's a much more tangible and much more relevant to employers looking to hire people.
I just want to reinforce that I think the assessment revolution is still ahead in the next 10 years or so. I think what we see in the best computer games will be translated into assessment in all kinds of different ways. You see it already for people who are training to be pilots, for example, and there's lots you can do. And in games, there are different routes through. There's often more than one right answer. You get instant feedback. You can be collaborative in the game often. All of these things are going to become part of assessment and will help relate the university experience to the world beyond the university. And on the advice to students, one of the things I would say to students is demand good teaching, demand the kind of teaching and mentoring and learning experience that you're entitled to be prepared for the modern world, and seize opportunities to be mentors to future students, because that's a great learning experience all around. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Great. I've had one audience member ask to be able to give one more question before we end, so I did say yes.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for this conversation. It's been very interesting. However, one thing that you just said in the last round of questions was something about useless degrees. That really hit a sensitive point, because I did a degree in humanities and I went on to do a master's and a PhD in a useless degree, according to my parents. And actually, I'm quite happy with the way things turned out. I'm currently a faculty member at the University of Waterloo, running my own company as well. So I wouldn't call it useless. I want to know, what is in your definition a useless degree, first? And second, it's all this talk about skills training and university should be preparing people for jobs and all that stuff. What about thinking? Who teaches students how to think? I teach students in first year, and yeah, numbers are great. What Pearson is showing out, all these unemployment rates, all that stuff, it's true. But students are 17 and 18 years old when they come to university. Do you think they know what they want? They don't. They need to take courses. They need to have a foundation in what they're doing. So what is Pearson's role in all of this? Because quite frankly, I'm very thankful for my university degrees in Spanish and Latin American studies, and in linguistics, a PhD. And I also have a master's degree in business, which is more useful, I guess. So anyway, my two questions are, what is a useless degree, and where is thinking in all this? How do we teach students, 17, 18-year-olds, how to think and how to ask the thoughtful questions that you're saying and you're encouraging them to ask when they approach employees? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we certainly left the animated question for the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a really good pushback. And when I said useless degree, I didn't mean to put a whole swath of sort of broad-based categories into like a useless degree, because I think that if a degree or a path fits, well, first of all, if it does provide really rigorous thinking, then there's always value for that. And then if it helps you achieve your goals, whether it's a faculty member in a particular department, or to be a very like critical thinker that then allows you to translate those skills into like a startup that you own and run, or into like a career that's totally different from your degree but still allows you to fulfill that job function, then it certainly isn't useless. I mean, what we've seen is, and I think what we're primarily talking about is, in the US, you've seen a lot of third-tier universities charge, $30,000, $20,000 a year for degrees that don't actually teach students any skills, and that doesn't mean they have to be. It could be in like Greek mythology, it could be in economics. Like if students don't learn what they need to at the end of it, and if they don't learn to be critical thinkers, then it's just a bad value for money. Not maybe useless, maybe not a bad use of time, but bad value for money certainly. And I think when it comes to what is thinking, that gets to the point that we've talked about throughout this, which is that there's still a really important role for really good teaching and learning, and that often that happens in small seminars in places where students' thinking is challenged by someone who's able to ask the deeper questions, or able to like push back on what and feedback on what a student has already said, and there's always going to be a really important role for that. And that's the big differentiator in quality, and that's where I think is like the biggest challenge of technology is, because that's so difficult to scale. You can scale content and curriculum, you can scale MOOCs, it's very difficult to scale high quality, rigorous, pushback and dialogue, because right now it requires a human.
Can I add to Katelyn's answer just a couple of things? One is, I did a history degree. I have never regretted it. Occasionally it's been useful in my career, but I've enjoyed reading history, learning history, talking about history all my life, and it probably did help me in my career. Certainly it helped me in my career to learn to think with rigorous teaching, but the content of it, I've just taken value from the intrinsic pleasure of learning history and keeping learning history all through my life. So I just wanted to, that is a valuable output from a degree, if not monetizable. And I totally agree on the rigorous thing, and just to reinforce Katelyn's point, and I think that goes back to the point I was making in my previous answer, the quality of teaching. David made the same point, that the dialogue between the teacher and the students in the classroom, that demands that you think clearly, or think creatively, or think whatever in the way that is appropriate for that lesson. I think those lessons in thinking are fundamentally important output of universities.
So I'll answer your second question first. The thinking skills that you mentioned are absolutely vital. What we say is that every element of a good education, whether it's at a school level or a higher education level, has three elements. The first one is knowledge, which is the history, the facts, how to solve equations. But that's just one element of an education, but it's often mistaken to replace everything else. So the first thing is knowledge. The second thing is thinking, knowing how to think creatively, knowing how to think intuitively, thinking on your feet, thinking after some reflection. I think learning how to think is a very important part of education. And the third thing is leadership skills, and that attributes to what we've been talking about, the ability to not just lead an individual or a team, but also be able to stand up and state your point when the need arises. So knowledge, thinking, and leadership, we think, are fundamental to any kind of learning you get, no matter whether it's at the kindergarten level or at a PhD level. So I completely agree with your point. To your first point about useless degrees, I think what I'll define is, what do we mean by a useful degree, and everything else is useless. So a useful degree is something that helps you improve your life through learning. And improvement in your life could mean getting a job, but improvement in your life could also mean getting intrinsic pleasure from what you learn. It could mean learning how to become a better artist. It could mean learning how to understand the world around you. So a useful degree is one that helps you achieve that. A useless degree is one that's contributed to 200,000 PhD students in the US who are on food stamps, who are looking for jobs but are not able to find them. A useless degree is the degree that in Karachi you see universities at every street corner printing out and selling to students for thousands of dollars when they can't afford it. That's what a useless degree is. So I'm not saying that a degree is useless by the method, by the subject of instruction. It's whether or not it helps a student achieve whatever their ambition is through the course of getting the degree.
Great. On that note, I think I'm going to call an end. Thank you very much.